What happens when a 73-year-old man helps his neighbor, and suddenly his own family decides he's not thinking clearly anymore? You won't believe how the medications he trusted for years became the most dangerous weapon used against him. They called it routine. I call it the beginning of a nightmare. I'm not the kind of guy who complains. 73 years on this earth taught me that whining doesn't change a damn thing. You take care of your lawn, you fix your coffee just the way you like it, and you keep your business to yourself. That's how I lived. Until the day I decided to do something good, and everything started spiraling. It was a Thursday. Quiet, with that overcast sky that makes you want to wrap yourself in a blanket and pretend the world doesn't exist. Instead of doing that, I was helping my neighbor, Carla. Sweet woman, mid-60s, hip surgery last fall. She couldn't get her trash bins to the street. I saw her struggling from my porch and thought, "Come on, Jerry, you're still strong enough to move a couple bins." So I walked over. I waved, smiled, cracked a joke about the squirrels plotting to take over the cul-de-sac, and rolled her bins to the curb. Simple, thoughtful, something any decent human would do. That's when I heard it, from across the street. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, standing there like a watchdog with a phone glued to her hand. She didn't say thank you, didn't smile, just looked me dead in the eye and said, "Should you really be doing that with your condition?" My condition? I asked what the hell she meant. She told me, in front of Carla, in front of the whole damn neighborhood, that Dad's memory hasn't been great lately. Her voice dropped into that fake worried tone, the one people use when they want to sound helpful, but are actually just digging your grave. I stood there frozen, the plastic bin still in my hands. I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetful. I was angry. She went on about how, at his age, he really shouldn't be exerting himself, as if I was a toddler about to run into traffic. The worst part? My own son, Brian, was just standing behind her, silent, looking down at his shoes like they were going to solve world hunger. I didn't say a word. I just walked back to my house. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from sheer humiliation. Inside, I sat in my recliner, turned off the TV, and let the silence wrap around me like wet wool. I wasn't upset because I took the trash out. I was upset because that one small act, that one decent thing, became ammo for my family to paint me as weak, fragile, and unfit. The next morning, Brian showed up. Didn't knock. Just barged in, holding a clipboard like he worked for the damn CDC. "Dad, Melissa and I think it's time you let us take over your prescriptions." I blinked. "Take over what now?" "Your medications. You're on a lot of stuff, and we want to help manage it." "Help," I said. "Or control." He flinched. "Dad, it's not like that." Of course it was. I'd been on the same medications for years. Standard senior cocktail. One for blood pressure, one for cholesterol, one for mild joint pain, and a fourth they added last year that I never fully understood, but went along with because the doctor said it was preventative. And now my own son was implying I couldn't handle it. I asked him if he even knew the names of the meds. He didn't. He mumbled something about statins and ACE inhibitors and changed the subject. That afternoon, Melissa called my doctor behind my back. I found out 3 days later when Dr. Simmons, a man I trusted, looked at me like I was 5 years old and said, "Your family's concerned about your cognitive health, Jerry. Maybe it's time for a re-evaluation." I stared at him. A re-evaluation of what, exactly? He fumbled with his pen. Memory, daily habits, compliance with medication. I sat there, watching this man, a man I brought bourbon to every Christmas, reduce me to a checklist of symptoms, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet from him, fully coherent and fuming. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to a second doctor, a woman named Dr. Alvarez, sharp as a tack, and not afraid to say things others won't. I told her everything. The meds, the family pressure, the creeping feeling that I was being boxed in by people who claimed to love me. She listened, took notes, asked smart questions. And then she leaned back, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Jerry, 3 of the 4 medications you're on are outdated protocols for your age and body type, and the 4th? That one has recently been linked to memory fog in patients over 70. I felt my jaw tighten. "You're telling me the meds they think are helping me are the reason they think I'm losing it?" Exactly. She printed out studies, gave me names, and even showed me a few class action lawsuits that had started building against the pharmaceutical companies responsible. I sat in her office, paper in hand, heartbeat in my ears, and I laughed. I laughed because it was either that or scream. I went home that night and looked at every pill bottle like it was a loaded gun. But here's the real kicker. When I told Brian and Melissa what Dr. Alvarez said, they didn't thank me. They didn't say, "Sorry." Melissa rolled her eyes and said, "You found one of those doctors, huh?" I don't know what those doctors are. The ones who tell the truth? But here's the thing. I wasn't going to roll over and take it anymore. We're just getting started. What happens next changes everything. You don't want to miss how deep this rabbit hole goes. I took my pills, but I was the one being swallowed. Let me tell you something most people won't admit. There's nothing more humiliating than realizing you've been playing the villain in someone else's script, and you didn't even write the damn lines. After what Dr. Alvarez told me, I started digging. Not with a shovel, with my memory, my body, my past 6 months. I started noticing things that had slipped right under my nose while I was busy trusting the system. Small things, misplaced keys, foggy mornings, conversations I had to repeat twice. I used to think it was just age catching up with me. Turns out, age had nothing on Big Pharma. I went through my prescription records like a crime scene investigator. That 4th medication, the one that was preventative. It was originally designed for people recovering from chemotherapy. How did I, a guy with no cancer history and a clean scan last year, end up on that stuff? Dr. Simmons had never explained. Probably thought I'd just nod and go back to mowing the lawn. And to be fair, I did. Because that's what they count on. Compliance, quiet, polite, obedient compliance. But I was done being polite. I called Simmons's office and requested a full medical report. The receptionist told me it would take a few business days. I told her that if I didn't have it by the end of the week, I'd be showing up with a lawn chair and a sign that said, "Patient Records Hostage Crisis." I got the file the next morning. 68 pages of jargon, check boxes, and scribbled doctor's notes that looked like someone had tried writing with their foot. Buried in the middle, page 37, was a line that made my stomach twist. Patient appears compliant and low risk for questioning treatment plan. That's how they saw me. Not as a human, as a box checked off for won't argue. A docile little sheep who wouldn't dare raise his voice. Now, here's the kicker. 2 of my medications, the blood pressure one and the preventative, were flagged in the FDA's updated advisory for seniors over 70. Not banned, just quietly flagged. Side effects included memory issues, dizziness, sleep disruption, and, surprise, surprise, depression. They handed me pills for my body and slowly rewired my mind. And my family? They didn't question it. They just looked at the effects and assumed the cause was me. But don't worry, I wasn't about to let that slide. I sat Brian and Melissa down at the kitchen table. They were still riding high on their elderly caretaker fantasy. Melissa even brought a folder labeled Dad's Safety Plan, like I was a toddler learning how to use scissors. I poured coffee, real strong, the kind that wakes up your ancestors. Then I handed them copies of the report, highlighted, annotated, indexed. Brian blinked. Melissa flipped pages like she was speed reading for a quiz. I watched their smug little caregiver expressions melt into confusion. "I'm not the one losing it," I said calmly. "But you were damn close to making it true." Melissa's defense was instant. "We were trying to help." "No," I said. "You were trying to manage. You weren't helping me. You were helping yourselves sleep better at night." Then I told them about Dr. Alvarez, and the lawsuits, and the studies. I saw Brian's face drop. Not out of guilt, out of fear. Liability looks bad on a resume. But instead of apologizing, Melissa doubled down. "Dad, Dr. Simmons is board certified. She sounds fringe." There it was, that smug tone people use when they'd rather trust a title than the truth. So I asked her, "If I gave you a fancy diploma and a lab coat, would you take medication from a toaster?" She didn't answer. Later that night, after they left, in a flurry of tight smiles and tense silences, I opened my laptop. I started reading, digging, forums, studies, support groups. Turns out, I wasn't alone. There were thousands of people like me, seniors labeled as forgetful or depressed, quietly drugged into submission by routine protocols and well-meaning families. Some were in worse shape. One man wrote that his wife was given a combination of medications that left her unable to speak for weeks, and no one questioned it. Just nodded along while the pharmacy refilled the prescription. I realized this was bigger than me. This wasn't about pills. It was about control, about silencing the very people who'd lived long enough to know when they're being lied to. And so, I made a decision. I was going to confront Dr. Simmons, not just in his cozy office, but in front of someone who could actually do something about it. The state medical board? You think that's too much? Tell that to the man whose own son tried to take away his autonomy because it was more convenient than listening. Tell that to the generation who built this country, only to be doped up and dismissed as old and forgetful. Tell that to the voice in my head that finally screamed, "Enough." Because here's what nobody tells you about getting old. It's not your body that breaks first. It's the way people stop hearing you. Like your words have an expiration date. Well, not mine. Not anymore. This is the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for, every ounce of tension, every injustice, is about to hit the fan. Stay with me. You're about to see what happens when the truth finally gets a microphone. The doctor had a degree, but I had a war to win. There's something strange that happens when you decide to stand up for yourself in old age. People don't get scared. They get annoyed. When I walked into Dr. Simmons's office with a calm face and a folder under my arm, the receptionist looked at me like I was there to ask for a pen, not to start a fire. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Hendricks?" she asked. "Nope," I said, placing the folder on her counter. "But tell Simmons it's the appointment he never wanted." I swear to you, the way she blinked made me feel 10 years younger. They tried to stall me. "He's with a patient. His schedule is full. Maybe next week." But I wasn't playing the waiting game anymore. I leaned in and whispered, "If I walk out of here without answers, I walk straight into a lawyer's office. Or worse, my podcast mic." That got me in within 5 minutes. When I entered his office, Simmons gave me that synthetic smile doctors learn in med school, the one they practice in mirrors to hide their guilt behind sympathy. "Jerry," he said, "I heard you've had some concerns." Concerns? I almost laughed. Like I was some neurotic parent worried my child was eating too much sugar. No, Simmons, this wasn't a concern. This was war. I opened the folder, slid it across his desk. Inside, my printed records, Doctor, Alvarez's report, the FDA warnings, and even 3 pages of legal notes I had drafted after calling an advocacy group for senior health rights. Before you say anything, I said, read page 4. He did, and his lips tightened. Page 4 was the one with the blood pressure medication, the one flagged for increasing the risk of confusion and cognitive decline in older patients. Right there, in his own handwriting, continue for now. Patient stable. Stable? I had been sinking, and he called it stable. Simmons tried to explain. He used words like protocol, average case, margin of safety. I cut him off. You prescribed me a mental cage, Simmons, and when my family locked the door behind me, you handed them the key. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look shocked. He looked bothered, like I was messing up his afternoon. That's when I dropped the real bomb. I'm submitting a complaint to the state medical board. He blinked. Finally, some color left his face. I could almost hear the spreadsheets in his head collapsing. He leaned back and said, Jerry, that's not necessary. We can adjust your medications. We can even refer you for specialized care if you want. No, Doc, I interrupted. You don't get to steer now. You had the wheel when I trusted you, and you drove me straight into a ditch. I walked out, calm, clear, charged with adrenaline like I hadn't felt in years, but I wasn't done. You see, something had shifted. It wasn't just about me anymore. I started talking, loudly, first in local senior groups, then in online forums, then at our town hall meeting. I stood up, held a microphone, and told a room full of people what had been happening to me. I talked about how easy it is to slip into compliance, how silence doesn't mean peace. It means sedation. I named medications. I showed reports. I even brought printouts of my medical file to pass around. The reactions were electric. Some seniors stared in disbelief. Others started whispering. And then, one man, Earl, 78, a former school principal, stood up and said, "They did this to my wife." That's when the storm broke. People began sharing stories. Husbands, wives, neighbors, all quietly numbed by medications they didn't question. Because doctors were supposed to know best. Because family didn't want the hassle. Because no one wants to admit the system can be wrong. Especially when it wears a white coat. That night, I opened an email from a woman named Linda. Her father had been on the same preventative med as I was. He slipped into a mental fog and died within 6 months. She didn't blame age. She blamed blind trust. She asked me what she could do, and that's when I realized I had become dangerous. Not because I was angry, but because I was awake. I started a website. Simple. No ads, no fluff. Just information. Flagged medications, links to studies, senior-safe doctors, printable questions for medical visits. I called it Still Thinking. By the end of the week, it had 3,000 visitors. Melissa found out. She showed up on my porch, holding her phone like a grenade. "Dad, what are you doing?" "What I should have done when you first questioned me in front of the neighbors." "You're making a scene." "No," I said. "I'm making a statement." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked her in the eye and asked her the question that had burned in me for months. When did protecting me turn into controlling me? She didn't answer, but the silence was louder than anything she could have said. That night, Brian called. His voice was quiet, shaken. "I read everything, Dad. I'm sorry." It wasn't the victory lap I expected, but it was real. And that meant something. I knew the fight wasn't over. I knew the system would keep grinding. Doctors would still overprescribe. Families would still silence. But not on my watch. Not anymore. Because once you see the bars of your cage, you can't pretend it's a window. And now, everything changes. What's about to happen will flip everything on its head. You think the storm already hit? Number. That was just thunder. Stick with me. The lightning strike is coming. They wanted me quiet. Instead, I became loud enough to echo. There's a moment in every fight, the real kind, not fists but stakes, when you realize you're no longer defending yourself. You're defending others, people like you, people who never saw it coming, and those who didn't live long enough to. That moment came for me on a Tuesday morning when the local paper printed my story. Front page, bold title, 73-year-old patient exposes silent drug crisis in senior care. I didn't ask for the attention, but I sure as hell didn't run from it. It wasn't just my neighbors who noticed. It was the mayor's office, the local health board, and, to my absolute shock, a national senior advocacy group that asked me to speak at a public health forum. Now picture this. A man who, 2 months ago, was being talked over at his own dinner table was now being handed a microphone in front of a full auditorium of doctors, administrators, journalists, and patients. A place where people were finally listening. And I didn't go easy. I didn't read from a script. I didn't sugarcoat it. I walked on stage, looked them straight in the eyes, and said, "You don't get to call this elder care when the care is convenience, and the elder is the one who gets silenced." Gasps? A few. Stiff ties shifting in their seats? Plenty. But I kept going. I laid it out like a crime scene. The medication protocols written decades ago. The way side effects were brushed off as natural aging. The silent collusion between pharmaceutical reps and overworked physicians. And the families who, out of fear or laziness, handed their parents over to pill bottles instead of conversation. Then I told them about Dr. Alvarez, about the pills I stopped taking, about how my mental fog lifted like someone finally opened a damn window. And then I dropped this. The worst part wasn't the medication. It was the way people stopped believing me the moment I questioned it. There was silence, not the awkward kind, the kind where people feel what you're saying and are too stunned to clap. Afterwards, a doctor, young, maybe late 30s, came up to me. He didn't introduce himself, just said, "I'm sorry. We do this too often." I nodded. "Start doing it less." It wasn't a revolution, but it was the spark. In the weeks that followed, something changed. The website Still Thinking blew up. Seniors from all over the country were writing in, sharing stories, asking questions, forming small advocacy chapters in their towns. I even got invited onto a daytime talk show where they introduced me as the man who dared to say no. Do I look like a revolutionary? Not really. Plaid shirt, faded jeans, receding hairline. But apparently, all it takes to lead is to say what everyone else is too tired or too drugged to say. But let's not wrap this in a bow just yet, because the real closure came from somewhere I didn't expect. Brian. One evening, he invited me over for dinner. No Melissa this time, just him and the kids. The house smelled like overcooked spaghetti. Classic. He sat across the table, eyes a little red, voice a little shaky. Then he told me something I'll never forget. "Dad, I didn't want to control you. I was scared. We thought we were losing you, and it was easier to blame age than question a doctor." I listened, didn't interrupt, just let him speak. He continued, "You taught me to trust authority growing up, and I did. I just forgot to trust you first. That hit. Not like a punch, like a sigh that had been sitting in my chest for months. We didn't hug, not right away, but we cleaned the plates together. And when I left, he said, I read your site every day, even shared it at work. Small things, right? But they felt massive. And then came the call. The state board had reviewed my complaint. They found inconsistencies in Simmons's prescription patterns. Turns out, I wasn't the first, just the first loud enough to leave a paper trail. They launched a formal review. Simmons retired early, quietly. No drama, no headlines, just gone. I didn't dance, didn't gloat, just sat on my porch that night, cup of tea in hand, and watched the wind blow through the trees like nothing happened. And everything had. So here I am now, not cured, not young again, but awake, sharp, present. I still take a few medications, ones reviewed and double-checked, ones I understand, and I talk, loudly, in grocery store lines, at community centers, even on social media. Yes, I figured out Instagram. Barely. Because the truth is, silence was the most dangerous prescription I ever took. And now, I'm off it for good.